20 Democratic presidential hopefuls will take the stage tonight and tomorrow in Miami for the first two primary debates of the 2020 election. They're separated into two debates. 10 candidates are set to take the stage tonight, the other 10 tomorrow. The crowded fields will prove difficult for people to stand out. We're joined now by Democratic strategist and the managing partner of Boots Road Group, Spencer Critchley, to break it all down and talk about how these candidates are expected to perform and who needs to step up. Spencer, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
All right, so this is the first chance for some of the lesser-known candidates to really stand out. What do you think that they need to do to make an impression?
You know, politics is a great business for conventional wisdom, and so you'll hear a lot of advice about how you have to attack Joe Biden or maybe Elizabeth Warren this evening as this evening's front runner, or you have to create a so-called viral moment. And really, I think sometimes people, in fact, often people overthink this stuff. Really what voters are looking for is a strong leader they can trust to fight for them. And the best advice I could give any candidate is figure out who you are, why you're running, and try to show people that. So no matter who you are as one of these candidates on this crowded stage, I would say don't try to be anybody else. Try to show people what's different and special about you. History of presidential elections is the history of surprises. And the people who ended up winning were the ones who ended up connecting with voters. And it's a mysterious process that's hard to predict.
What do you think the big issues for tonight's debate will be?
You know, and that's part of this, because I don't actually believe issues matter all that much to voters. I mean, it's one of those things that's necessary, but nowhere near sufficient. So competing on issues, I think, is a loser's game. This does not mean there shouldn't be any substance behind you. It's crucially important that there really be issue positions behind you. But people make voting decisions in the blink of an eye. There's actually research that shows this, that sometimes it's a fraction of a second is all it takes for somebody to make the decision of who they're going to vote for. It's really happening at an almost animal kind of level where you're looking for the gorilla you think is the one that needs to lead our troop of gorillas and protect us from danger.
It's so interesting. A new poll found that Joe Biden is the top candidate for voters who are focused on climate change. Do you think that that's going to be a big issue this year? In the past, it's certainly been something that people have focused about, but do you think that something's changed in the past 4 years, that climate change might actually be a really important issue this time around?
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting, Jay Inslee has made climate change the centerpiece of his campaign, but a lot of voters probably have no idea who Jay Inslee is, but they do know who Joe Biden is, again, for not really issue-related positions, as strong as I think Joe Biden is. And climate change is also an example of how nonlinear this process is. The human mind is very bad at predicting trends forward into the future because we tend to think in terms of linear growth curves. And what often happens is more akin to a change of state or a change of phase, like water suddenly turning into steam or a tornado suddenly forming. And I think that, and that's probably an apt comparison for climate change, unfortunately, I think climate change is going to be one of those. People will have seen one too many of these extreme forest fires or droughts or floods or freak storms or melting glaciers or starving polar bears, and it suddenly flips, and the great majority of people will suddenly realize this actually is an extremely serious threat.
Another recent poll found that Senator Warren is leading among young voters. You think she has an advantage because just in terms of her placement, in terms of being kind of one of the bigger names tonight? Yeah,
and she's an example, I think, of somebody who has stuck with who she is. From a political consultant's point of view, you could point out all sorts of things that are wrong, so-called, with, in quotation marks, with Elizabeth Warren. She comes across as wonky and kind of professorial, and she's not super dynamic. You could take apart all of that stuff. But in fact, what works is that she is wonky. She knows that's who she is.
Right.
And she's stuck by it. And so she's slowly and steadily been climbing in the polls as she's had a chance to show her stuff to people. And I think, very few people really understand the details of what she's talking about. But I think that they get that she's substantive and that she means what she says, and that's helping them to form a connection with her as a leader.
Any predictions for tonight? Anyone you think is going to do surprisingly well or maybe flop?
Yeah. Well, earlier I mentioned conventional wisdom, and it's also sort of like predicting the stock market. It's a lot of fun to do. And there are all kinds of experts who will confidently predict what the stock market's going to do every day. And then what they have to be really good at is explaining why they were wrong the next day. I think it's the same tonight. We never know how this is going to work. I think the people who've been strong so far will probably continue to be strong. Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, the people who are out front for a reason. I think what we should, if I were going to predict something, I would say prepare to be surprised. Somebody you least expected, like maybe John Delaney or somebody, will have a moment and people will suddenly say, what? And by the way, there's studies show people very often do change their minds from the beginning to the end of a primary debate. They really can have a big impact.
Great insight. Spencer Critchley, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.